It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. This past week has been quite an emotional week, and I've normally have no difficulty determining what I want to discuss on the show. I had mixed feelings about what I wanted to share. I think what I want to focus on, first of all, is the news of the day. There has been significant financial news that's occurred. I want to touch on those and then probably finish up with some thoughts of where we're headed and how it's going to affect us all, both in terms of our money, our country, our society, all of that. The first big news is the Federal Reserve has lowered interest rates a quarter point, first time in 2025. Now, ironically, they did it at a time when stocks are at all-time highs. Home prices are at all-time highs. Bitcoin, likewise. Gold, also all-time highs. The money supply is at an all-time high. The Federal Reserve's been printing like crazy. National debt is also at all-time highs. CPI inflation is about twice the federal funds target rate of 2%, yet the Federal Reserve cut interest rates. Now, they have a dual mandate where they're supposed to keep inflation in check and jobs strong. The problem with that dual mandate oftentimes is those two things can be counteractive to each other. And normally you would think when you have asset prices at all-time highs, debt high, inflation nearly double the target rate, that would be the cause for an interest rate raise, not a cut. So why did the Federal Reserve cut rates recently? Well, it's really quite simple. It has nothing to do with the financial, and it has everything to do with the political. What I mean by that is this. The Fed is desperately wanting to avoid a recession. One, because it doesn't want to get blamed and put its independence at risk. It's no secret the Trump administration has been pushing on the Federal Reserve in terms of lowering interest rates. I'm not certain that's the right way to go right now. It is for the government. I mean, lower interest rates are best for the borrower. If you owe a lot of money, lower interest rates definitely helps the borrower. Well, who's the largest borrower in the world currently? The federal government. Now, does that benefit the people, the citizens? Not necessarily, particularly if inflation continues to run high. Why? The cost of goods and services continue to rise at a higher rate or an uncomfortable rate that makes it harder and harder for people to purchase things, which tends to weaken your economy. It remains to be seen whether the Federal Reserve will continue to lower rates through the remainder of this year. Many think they will. The most likely scenario as a result of lowering interest rates is that asset prices will then continue to climb, at least temporarily, or at least up to a point. And there are several reasons behind this. First of all, let's touch on asset prices. If we look at every major tech or investment bubble that's ever occurred in the U.S. stock market, this is going back to the 1840s. Each of them have burst. The largest bubble previously was 1929 and the 1999 dot-com bubble. In fact, the 1999 dot-com bubble on the returns of the indexes from the beginning to where it hit its peak was about 400%, or fourfold increase over several years. The AI euphoria, as it's being called, or often referred to today, has now hit approximately 600%, which is 50% higher than the previous bubble ever recorded in the history of the stock market. Lower interest rates tend to fuel higher asset prices. That pours gas on the fire. So you would think, at least temporarily, we should see some continued increase of the asset values. So the Fed is not doing anything to tamp this down. In fact, they're throwing gas on the fire. They're also doing this, though, with faulty information. And here's what I mean by this. The consumer price index is what's often referred to in terms of increase in prices and an inflation gauge. It's the number that the government or the Fed tends to use. The CPI is a measurement of a number of different items that the typical consumer purchases or spends money on. One of the largest items included in the CPI is housing costs. It's about 30% of the total calculation. Now, it turns out just a year ago, in August of 2024, in fact, only 9% of the CPI relied on actual accurate information. It turns out the most recent CPI numbers, 1/3 of the data was estimated. And what do I mean by this? So what they do for the housing sector, for example, is when the Bureau of Labor Statistics each month is measuring this, they'll use estimates for rent, for example, using similar nearby units if a unit is vacant. If the tenants don't answer for their survey, their rent is imputed, in other words, estimated, based on other renters in the same price bracket. So it's not based on real, actual numbers, it's based on estimated numbers. And the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI numbers, over 1/3 of those were estimated, and 1/3 of the CPI numbers based just on housing alone. Well, this can cause quite a problem because you're dealing with estimated numbers and not real numbers. As this continues, the numbers become less and less accurate as this continues to balloon. Now, why should you care? Well, CPI determines Social Security cost of living increases, tax bracket thresholds, wage contracts, and Federal Reserve interest rate policy. And what's ironic is we have one of the most data-rich ages in history, and yet our inflation measure is depending on fragile surveys, filler estimates, and is becoming less and less accurate as we go forward. This is a recipe for disaster. Now, here's another key thing that needs to be understood. According to Moody's, the economy is reliant on the fortunes of the well-to-do. If the ultra-rich get nervy, that will mean a recession. This recent Moody's analysis shows that U.S. spending growth since the pandemic has come almost entirely from the wealthiest households, the top 20%. The bottom 80% of Americans are merely keeping pace with inflation. Their purchasing power has not increased. Their income and their cost of income have basically been the same. And the point the Moody's analysis states is if you feel like the economy is not working for you, it's because it probably isn't. It's the top 20% which are driving growth. Oftentimes, you'll hear this through legacy media, well, the economy's doing just fine. And the people that they're around, the bubble that many of those people are in, the folks that they know are high-income earners, and yes, they are doing fine. Yet you go to other parts of the country or just talk to other people, and you see and hear an entirely different story. This Moody's analysis really paints the picture, or explains the reason why. It is really coming down to an 80-20 situation. Why should this be of concern? Just like concentration in the stock market increases risk, like we've seen with this AI euphoria, where the vast majority of the growth has been concentrated in literally a handful or two of stocks, increases the risk of a correction if one or two of those falter for any reason. We're increasingly relying on a smaller and smaller number of people to continue purchasing to keep the economy going. About 2/3 of GDP is consumer spending, so it's a really, really big deal. When you put together that AI's promise is sky high, and so is the pressure to deliver, because companies have been pouring staggering amounts of money into AI tech, the technology is guzzling energy. It turns out, according to a recent MIT technology report, that as much as 22% of all electricity generated in the United States today is supporting AI. Another study found out that using a single 100-word email on ChatGPT uses up 3 water bottles of energy. Another study pointed out that generating a single 100-word email on ChatGPT uses the equivalent of 3 water bottles of fresh water just to cool the systems. And data center investment alone last quarter drove more GDP growth than consumer spending. We are increasingly narrowing, concentrating where the areas of growth are, where the areas of consumer spending are, to where even a small number of companies, or perhaps even a single company, could trigger a correction event, or a small group of consumers decide to stop spending, could trigger a recession. These are things that you should be aware of. We're not hearing about very much in the legacy media or news or anywhere else for that matter. And these are things that you should consider while investing if you're still exposed. If you have a significant amount of risk, you should understand what that risk level truly is. And are you comfortable with that risk? The financial industry continually discusses your risk profile. For some people, they don't have a problem with it, but that happens to be the minority, and that's human behavior studies show that 80% of human beings do not do well with those types or levels of risk. If you are realizing that your risk profile is higher than you're comfortable with, or this concerns you, there are options. You can still invest in financial tools that allow you to have unlimited upside, much like you do with a typical stock market portfolio, but not the downside risk. This is the golden age of fixed assets. We have annuities that offer unlimited upside potential while guaranteeing the principal at the same time. These are powerful tools, and we're seeing the best numbers we've seen in over 40 years. If these are things that give you pause, you may want to consider diversifying, reducing your exposure, yet still having the capability to continue to grow if this AI frenzy continues, this euphoria that we've been experiencing continues to grow. If you want more information, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. And yes, you'll reach me. I'll be happy to share with you how you can reduce your exposure while still maintaining the potential upside that exists. Stay tuned in the next segment. I got some other things that I think you'll find quite interesting about the economy and some more information about real estate.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferenc. For more information, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me at yourpersonalbank.com. As I was stating in the first segment, the concentration of not only the stock market, but of the economy in general, consumer spending, is becoming historic. In fact, 7 tech companies tied to AI now make up 35% of the S&P 500's total market cap. Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, and Tesla now account for over 40% of NVIDIA's revenue in buying its AI chips. This is according to corporate filings. Collectively, they're pouring over $400 billion into AI capital expenditure. If one of those companies stumbles, steps back, pauses, has a challenge or any issue whatsoever, or decides even to build their own chips, for example, this will impact NVIDIA significantly, which is the poster child of the AI euphoria that we have been experiencing over the last few years. I shared about a month ago on this show, there was a MIT study recently published that stated 95% of companies that had invested in generative AI have seen no productivity or financial benefits. A recent McKinsey report has now come out that 71% of companies approximately are using generative AI, but over 80% of them say it has had no tangible impact on earnings. Look, I'm not knocking AI or its potential. It has the potential to substantially change the economy, much like the internet did about 25 years ago. My point is simple. We've heard a lot of hype. There has been a tremendous amount of hype. And as this article I was referring to earlier, saying the AI's promise is sky high, but so is the pressure. The pressure to deliver, that is. Life happens. Reality sets in. Expectations are not met. I mean, if you're listening, have you ever built a house or done a remodel? And have you ever had a contractor come to you and say, oh, we can do this in so much time and for X amount of money? Did you believe him? And how many times did it actually happen? How many times have you seen a construction project in on time and under budget? It's extremely rare. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it is extremely rare occurrence. Building the infrastructure for AI to enable it to do what these companies want it to do is a massive task. We're already starting to see some delays, some frustrations, some challenges, some infrastructure issues, some figuring out how to use it issues, some adaptability issues. There's many, many other things that may and likely will happen. I'm just saying, use a little common sense. balance the potential against the hype. And the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. You're going to have some people that are going to be super hyped up about it and others who are going to be negative even. We've heard doomsday projections. The truth will probably be somewhere in the middle. And the time frame will probably take longer than the hype that we're hearing. And that's going to frustrate and challenge a lot of investors. And we're already starting to see some cracks in that. And I guess one other point I want to make is the historic rise of these handful of tech companies that have really been involved with AI have produced stupendous results. And for somebody who invested heavily in those companies some years ago, have seen historic returns. But is that how most people invest? And the answer is no. Most people diversify. They have various different assets, classes, even, invest in real estate or other things too. In other words, it's a rare individual that puts all their eggs in one basket, right? The reality is, although we hear these or we see these tremendous numbers, when I look at a typical portfolio statement and various kinds of things, what has the average person actually really been returning? Well, far, far less than the stupendous numbers we've seen from the Magnificent Seven, for example. It's extremely rare when I come across one of those, and I have seen a few, don't get me wrong, but it is rare. Now, if you happen to be one of those rare individuals that had the foresight, or let's be honest, plain dumb luck, you got into the right thing at the right time. I hear that quite often when people are honest. They're like, I don't know, it seemed like a good idea. I had no idea it was going to do what it did. And most people who are honest recognize that. Great. I mean, if you benefited, kudos to you. More power to you, man. Be happy. When is it going to stop? When is this merry-go-round going to stop? I don't know. I don't have the answer, and neither does anyone else. But what I can say is just looking at historicals, looking at the concentration, the sheer numbers, the PE ratios, anything else you want to use, we are at all-time historic risk levels. I'm not trying to rain on people's parade. I'm trying to bring in a little bit of common sense. And I know it's tough with the basic human emotions of fear and greed. Both are really powerful right now, and in my opinion, clouding a lot of people's judgment. Not just my opinion. A lot of experts are saying the same thing. I mean, even Warren Buffett has expressed similar type of things. Why has he moved to so much cash, for example? He's looking at the numbers. He's being dispassionate. It's hard to do that. It's hard to remove emotions from your money and your financial decisions, especially if you've been winning big. I mean, a perfect example is Vegas. Those fancy hotels weren't built on people that won. It was built on the people who lost. All I'm saying is if you were one of those folks who has had experienced some tremendous returns or higher than average even, and you recognize that maybe things are getting a little scary, a little nervous, maybe you got a bit of a fear of heights, if you know what I'm saying, you could pull back a little bit. Why not? Why wouldn't it make sense to lock in some of those gains or take out what you put in and then play with house money? Because then you could truly protect what you started with. Put it in something guaranteed that can grow safely, insured, even tax-free or highly liquid. We've had multiple options. Again, it's the golden era of fixed assets. Not only has the Magnificent Seven done awesome, and other things, as I stated earlier, housing is all-time highs, debts at all, but guess what? So are fixed asset returns. And they're expected to continue that way for the next 5-10 years. That's not me saying that. That's JP Morgan and Vanguard and BlackRock analysts. You pick. I could list one after another. They're all saying the same thing. What I'm shocked by is when I talk to somebody who's been involved with this and the level of, I don't know how else to put it, but euphoria, or the other side of it, I'll talk to somebody who's kind of missed out or the fear of missing out. There's that too. FOMO. Those are real emotions. And those emotions oftentimes will lead to bad financial decisions, bad investment decisions. And particularly if this is maybe money you've got set aside for retirement, either now or in the future, or some of the money you can't afford to lose. If you lost some, okay, but there's some you can't, you can only lose so much. I mean, are you really willing to take that risk? These are questions I can't answer for you. There's somebody listening right now that needs to hear this message, I guess. And that's, with stuff that's gone on this past week and on, I've never been being afraid to share my faith, but I've been inspired to be more bold about it. In fact, this is on my heart. Somebody needs to hear this message, and somebody may be a little frustrated by it because they don't want to hear it. Okay, I understand that. But there's somebody listening right now that needs to hear this message and And why I say that is I'm talking to folks every week that when I point out like the S&P has hit all-time highs, PE ratios, things like that are all-time highs, they weren't even aware of it because they were just so focused on what's going on or living their life or any number of things. They've done well. They think it's going to continue. And we get in this idea, they get in this comfort zone. It's never going to go down again. And of course it will. Now, could it continue to go up from here? Sure, of course it will. But will it go down at some point? Absolutely. When? Who knows? How long? No one knows. How far? Again, no one knows. But if your risk tolerance, you realize this, that you are at historical levels, but you're also at historical risk levels, and that causes a little tightening in your gut, you might want to listen to that because at some point, something's going to happen. And with technology the way it is today, things happen really fast. This could happen really fast and get really ugly really quick. And you may not be able to respond quick enough. And as I was starting to say before, the other part of the message is human behavior studies have pointed out forever that 80% of people are not built for this type of risk. They're just not. It's not in their risk tolerance. It's not in their personality or whatever. And if that's you, why are you putting yourself in that position? Why cause yourself stress? I mean, really, in life, what's more important? To squeeze the last dollar of gains you can out of an investment, or to have some peace of mind, know, hey, you did well, put yourself in a position where you lock down the downside, you still got unlimited upside, but you don't have the downside risk. I guess I'm talking to two different types of people. The 20% that are the risk takers and the 80% that are not so much, which that's everyone. So this is messages for everyone, I guess. I know I got off on a tangent a bit there, but I think that was super important. Many of these companies have put down a massive bet on all of this, and it's got to pay off. It's got to pay off in a massive way and in a fairly short period of time for some of them. Or, as this Axios article states, the AI hype is masking recession signals in the market. And that really is true. It is a bifurcated economy, as I stated earlier. 20% of consumers, the high income earners, are driving the consumer spending. The other 80% are not. Their level of spending is about the same as it was in 2000. We're increasingly concentrating into a few smaller and smaller group of people that we're counting on for the economy to continue. And that's why I've said, depending on where you are in the country and depending on where your income is and various things, there are parts of the country that are already in recession. There's no argument. The facts are there. Will this continue? Will we pull ourselves out of it? All those are things that remain to be seen, but the risks are definitely there. And you should be aware of it. By doing so, by being aware of this, not ignoring the facts, keeping this in consideration helps you make a better, well-rounded decision. That's my point. If you are one of those people, those 20% risk takers who said, hey, I've risked enough, I want to lock down some of the gains, put it into something that I still have unlimited upside gain with no downside losses, protecting the principal, great. If you're one of the 80% who are not so much a big risk taker and you're in a higher risk profile that maybe you are comfortable with, or the sky high prices are causing you to have a little gut check, causing maybe a little concern, stress even, contact me. I have clients that made 20+% last year with no downside risk. And guess what? They locked the gain in. So if the markets do correct, guess what? They don't lose. They get to keep what they gain. How would you like to be in that position? It's a golden era of fixed assets. I can show you tools like annuities with unlimited upside with no downside risk. I can show you other products like your personal bank with guaranteed returns. Again, unlimited upside with no downside risk. Or steady, consistent returns, tax-free, insured. All those things are available, but you won't know unless you explore, learn about it, get educated, particularly about how things are like today. Best we've seen in over 40 years. If you haven't looked at this the last couple of years, you'll be shocked. Stay tuned in the next segment. We've got a few more things about the economy, and I promise I will get into real estate this time, so don't miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferenc. For more information, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So another quick little article from Fortune I thought was very illuminating. Points out that the average American has not gotten any richer over the past 5 years after a breakneck 21% boost from 2014 to 2019. So average wages and such for the average American increased significantly for the 4 years prior to the pandemic, and then has basically plateaued or flatlined ever since. And this is according to the U.S. Census Bureau. The median household income currently in 2024 was $83,000. When adjusted for inflation, these people have no more buying power than they did 5 years ago. They're marking time. They're plateaued. They're flatlining. The top 20% income earners are still spending more than they were before. They are the ones driving this economy as we speak. Now, another shocking stat I found is it turns out that the bottom 50% of U.S. households now only hold 2.5% of the total U.S. wealth. A lot of that happens to be in the stock market. So those who were heavily invested in the markets have benefited tremendously in the last few years. As we discussed in the last segment, how much longer this AI euphoria continues remains to be seen. When will this bubble burst? Which it will, like every other bubble ever has in history. I can take this back 150 years if you'd like, but every bubble bursts, most of them pretty hard. But here's the brutal fact. The fact that half of America only has 2.5% of the total wealth, only about 30% of Americans have any significant stock investments, is 70% of America would be indifferent or even somewhat supportive of a stock market crash. Do you realize that? This has massive impact for policy, government decisions, various things like that, because these are the kinds of things that cause civil unrest, frustration in people, particularly the younger generations, seeing where they're not able to progress financially like their parents or grandparents did. And I know I have clients of all ages. It's not unusual for me to be talking to an 80-year-old, and the next meeting I'll be talking to somebody in their 20s and everything in between. And I often hear this, and I'm not picking on anybody, but some of the older generations will say this. They'll say, well, when I bought a home, we worked hard and we had double-digit interest rates like in the 70s. And that is true. It had horrendous interest rates. But as I point out to folks who bring that up, is that the average cost of the home was far less. In fact, for the typical boomer generation, the average, when they first purchased their first home in the 70s, the purchase price of that home was 2 years' salary. So the average home was 2 years' income. Today, it's 5 years. The average home is 5 years average income, 2.5 times higher. Plus, yes, interest rates are lower, but they're still higher than they've been the past decade or so. So it's like a double whammy, which answers part of the question why only about 30% of Americans today can afford the average home. They can't even qualify for the mortgage. Now, it's also been pointed out to me, to be totally fair, the average home today is much nicer and bigger than it was in the 70s. That is true. But if you look at homes that are what the average young American could purchase, or the average American for that matter, in most cases, it's not in a neighborhood you'd want to live in or a home you'd want to be in. That's the problem. And that's why we are now seeing Google searches for help with mortgage have now surpassed the 2008 housing crisis, the worst ever recorded. That is like a canary in a coal mine alarm bell that should be ringing. And even older Americans are starting to struggle with this. This article mimics the story I've heard from a number of folks I've talked to and some clients. As this person pointed out, I'm 65 and my property taxes and insurance keep going up. How can I afford my house in another 5 years? They're on fixed income and the cost of keeping their home continues to increase. So this isn't just about younger Americans or starter homes or anything like that. It's also starting to affect retirees who often are fixed income and their costs of their home are increasing significantly to where it is, in some cases, causing them to not be able to afford it anymore. Now, there are some parts of the country that do have freeze on property taxes for seniors and things like that, and I'm in full favor of that type of thing. You've worked your whole life and contributed to the system. You've paid a lot of taxes. We all do, but you've paid your share, and you shouldn't be forced out of your home because you're renting a property that you paid for from the government. And I say that intentionally. Yes, you may own it on paper, but statement I've made for quite some time now is if you have to pay property tax on a home just so you can live there, you pay a government, and if you don't pay them, they can kick you out. Do you really own the home? The answer is no. You're just renting your home from the government. Even though if you paid funded off the mortgage from the bank. And I just think that's one of the most insidious taxes that we have. And I would be in favor of eliminating all property tax personally, but I know that's a rather radical statement. But certainly for those who are, say, retired or lived in their home for a number of years, let's give them a break. And others will say, well, where are the government's going to get the money for infrastructure? Well, we've been taxed to death. We've been paying so many taxes. It's beyond ridiculous. We've discussed this on the show a number of times. When you start adding up all the different taxes that we pay, whether it's property tax, sales tax, gas tax, income tax, and, payroll tax, you name it, just add it up. Just, it's beyond ridiculous. We need to cut the spending is what needs to happen. We've seen tremendous levels of waste that's been brought up by DOGE on the federal government side. I'm quite confident that there's a lot of waste in state and local governments too that hasn't just been brought to light. They could live on less, and they should be forced to do, but that's a whole different discussion. Here's another good point about housing and such. Since 2019, so basically the last 5 years, income growth has been about 22% total. That's taken all across the board. As I stated earlier, the bottom 80% have not increased their income when adjusted for inflation. Only the top 20% have. But at the same time, mortgage cost growth has increased by 92%. Costs to buy a home have increased 4 times faster than incomes. That type of scenario is not sustainable. It's not a healthy economy. It's not a healthy societal situation. It's not a healthy for the type of government or society we're going to have going forward. Folks, we start either fixing these problems or we're going to start seeing more and more radical responses. This Mamdani character who's likely going to be the next mayor of New York, we're going to see more of that because more and more people just getting pissed off and frustrated and they want to do something different. I don't agree with what Mamdani wants to do, a lot of socialism, but I can understand the feeling behind it by a lot of these people that are supporting him. Also, another factor that's going to impact home prices is affordability with rent. Now, the positive thing is because the cost of housing and purchasing has gone up to all-time records, highest we've ever seen, ever recorded, it turns out renting has kind of flatlined, is plateaued, and now it's significantly more affordable to rent than buy a home by one of the largest gaps ever recorded. The last time we saw something similar was at the peak of the housing crisis, or the Great Recession, basically in 2006. These things won't sustain. These types of extreme levels of asset prices or record housing prices or rent affordability, I don't care how you measure it. When you're at the extreme, things tend to revert back to the mean. Here's another red flag or canary in the coal mine. Late rent payments are now continuing to tick up to the highest levels we've seen recorded in years. What's going to happen? What do we do? To answer the what's going to happen, that's a tough question to answer because no one really knows. But I think the most likely scenario is a lot of volatility, uncertainty. As I've been stating today, historic concentrations in companies, in consumer spending, and an increasingly smaller and smaller group of people or companies that are supporting the economy or companies that are spending and pushing the asset prices. So anything that causes even a small portion of those people or those companies to change direction or cut back are going to have significant impacts, outsized impact. That's going to cause volatility. And uncertainty always causes volatility. The best thing to do is protect yourself, reduce your risk, reduce your exposure. Look, if you still want to grow your money, great. Again, I've said there's so many options available in the fixed asset market, which is what I specialize in. And it's the golden era of fixed assets. It's the best time in over 40 years. We've got numbers we've never seen. This is my 26th year now in the industry. I've never seen anything like some of the products that we're able to offer. I share the numbers and the returns and things that we can do with guarantees, the whole thing, and people are shocked. So I think the first and most important thing to do really comes down to that. Look at your situation, really take a hard look and look at how much risk exposure do I really have? And am I comfortable with that level of risk exposure? Human nature states in most cases, most people that are listening to me right now are not. That's not their personality. That's not their risk tolerance. And you can still, again, not give up the upside. You're just giving up the downside, particularly when we're talking about annuities with unlimited upsides and protect the principal at the same time. And if you want liquidity, we can do that for you too. If you want to reduce your tax liabilities, we can do that for you too. There's all types of different tools we can use and a mix of several, in fact. Most of the time people say, well, you do this or you do that. Frankly, in most cases, I do several things for folks because not one financial tool necessarily will suffice and do everything you want it to do. You have multiple goals, you have different buckets buckets of money oftentimes allocated to different purposes. So we use those tools or mix and match as necessary to maximize your growth, minimize your market risk, minimize your taxes, maximize your liquidity, and most importantly, I guess I'm going to say is increase your peace of mind. Know that no matter what happens, you're good. You're guaranteed things are fine. You're going to go forward and you can relax and enjoy your life and not worry about it. I've lived through 08, 09. In fact, I lived through the dot-com bubble. I was in the business, in the financial industry. I was my second year in the financial industry when the dot-com bubble burst on us. It was traumatic for a lot of people. So was the Great Recession. I know it's been a long time since we've had those kinds of things happen. People tend to forget, or maybe they weren't around long enough, or maybe the advisor you're talking about doesn't have enough experience to even realize to have that kind of level of experience to understand what it's like and what to do. Maybe you just want a second opinion. Whatever that may be, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. I'll give you the strengths and the weaknesses. I'll give it to you straight. But at least you'll know what you're doing and why you're doing it, or at least understand maybe the level of risk you have or what is comfortable for you. What's the best fit for you? And that's the key. Stay tuned in the last segment. I want to share some thoughts about what's happened in this country the past week or so, where I think things are going. And frankly, I'm pretty darn optimistic. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferenc. For more information, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. So the events of the past week or so have really, been impactful for a lot of people. If you heard the show last week, I did discuss a lot about Charlie Kirk, the assassination, how it impacted me personally. I did meet him. I knew Charlie. I can't say I was a close friend, but I did listen to him for quite some time. I knew people. I'm from Phoenix. I mean, that's where he's from. I know a number of people that worked for him. I know some people that were actually close to him. And so it was quite impactful for me personally, and a lot of people I've talked to. On the other side of the coin, I've had some folks mention to me, why is it such a big deal? And so one of the biggest things, and I'm going to share that, and I think share some insight because I've really dug in deep trying to understand some of it myself. And one of the biggest things, though, recently from a, economic financial standpoint that's a lot of people are struggling with or struggling to understand has to do with this effort of folks who celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk and now losing their jobs. And some have misconstrued that as a freedom of speech right or First Amendment rights and things like that, and not really fully understanding what the First Amendment is about, what it stands for. Now, the first and simplest one, most clear and obvious, is anyone in the military. Because if you're in the military, as I was, you were subject to what's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So it's an extra set of laws that you have to follow while being a member of the military, and you voluntarily choose to do this. Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice prohibits service members from social media conduct that prejudices good order and discipline or brings discredit upon the armed services. And it's extremely clear. It states, and I'm quoting, "This includes posting obscene or inappropriate content, disloyal statements, harassment, threats, or sensitive information, or engaging in online bullying. Violations can lead to court-martial with penalties up to dishonorable discharge." Anyone in the military should understand you should not celebrate the death of somebody, no matter what you think about that person. That is, frankly, obscene and disgusting behavior. And the military has every right to dishonorably discharge you from the military. It's conduct unbecoming an officer, among other things. Once you understand that, you'll then understand that most companies have social media policies that mirror the military. An employer has every right to terminate an employee for content that they find objectionable, particularly if it's going to look poorly on their company or their brand or their customers or coworkers or anything like that. And when you get into areas where you might consider more sensitive, where you have a little more influence, let's say working with children, teachers, education, healthcare. Healthcare, particularly doctors, are supposed to abide by the Hippocratic Hippocratic Oath. The medical profession has been famous for treating enemy combatants in war, even while still in uniform. They understand that that person they're working on to save their life, a few minutes prior, if given the chance, would have shot them dead. Yet they treat them and try to help them anyway. That's honorable. And so a person in the healthcare field, to me, is especially egregious. If you're celebrating or encouraging or feel positive at all, frankly, about somebody dying, somebody getting shot, getting murdered. I don't care what you think about that person. Any person in a position of consequence, some people have referred to pilots and things like this. It's not cancel culture. It's about protecting society from mentally unhinged and morally depraved people. These are the kind of people that should not be trusted with decision-making authority. I mean, think about it a minute. How do you think a conservative commentator, let's say, someone who is fairly well known, was in a car accident, ended up in a hospital, and the doctor was adamantly against their beliefs? Would they do everything they could to save their life? Do you want to have somebody who is in law enforcement or the military who diametrically disagrees with your opinions and uses their position of authority, person carrying a gun, that's pretty authoritative, to treat you in some negative manner because they may recognize or find out what your beliefs are and they may be against yours? I don't care what they are, either side. You see my point? And we certainly don't want folks who are celebrating death to be influencing children. I mean, that's just egregious. I'm sorry. And that's why those types of people, particularly take a soldier, law enforcement, whatever, celebrating domestic terrorism and political violence, they can't be trusted to defend civilians or this country for that matter. So it isn't cancel culture, and it's not a violation of your First Amendment rights. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, it's there to protect you from the government doing something to you because they don't agree with your view or stifling your speech. Here's a great example. If you go up to a police officer and say you hate the government, they can't arrest you for that. So freedom of speech, the First Amendment, is a restriction on government activities, actions, not the other way around, not private enterprise or not individuals. In fact, if you read the Constitution, the entire document is all about restrictions on government. You see, we've gotten so far away from the Constitution, it's ridiculous. I've discussed this on the show many times over the years. There's a real true lack of understanding of what's in the Constitution and what it means. I know I'm going to be going into this more as we go forward in the shows because I got some other things I've learned recently that I found mind-blowing, but I want to stay focused on this topic for now. The Constitution restricts the government, and then Article 10 of the Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment, is the one, it's a simple one-sentence amendment that basically says any of the rights listed in the Constitution, it's called enumerated rights. You can go in there and it lists like what the executive branch can do, what the legislative branch can do, what the executive branch, what their duties are. And by the way, it's pretty limited. It's a pretty short list, folks. And it just says in Article 10, it says if the government has no right in anything outside of those other things are reserved for the states or individuals, the people. So most of what our government does right now is unconstitutional. Nothing to do with the Constitution. Super easy example is Department of Education. Nothing in the Constitution about the federal government being involved in education. It should not be. It's unconstitutional. So when some people discuss, you can agree or disagree with this, but it is unconstitutional. From a financial standpoint, the Federal Reserve is also. It's not a constitutional thing. That's a creation of Congress. And by the way, the Federal Reserve is not federal or a reserve. It's a privately owned bank that makes decisions that benefits itself, like right now, self-preservation because it wants to maintain its independency, to lower interest rates at a time when it should be raising interest rates because inflation's still higher than it should be. Asset prices are all at all-time highs, and so is debt. This is probably going to cause more problems in our economy, not less. And I'm not happy about what they've done, and most reasonable people are not either. Now, the real cause, it's not all the Federal Reserve's fault. The real cause is the government keeps spending more than it should, which keeps throwing fuel on this fire of inflation, and prices continue to go up. But again, I digress. We are starting to see the beginnings of, I think, a weeding out of those that don't belong in our civil society or to be at least influence that society in any way. We're seeing people lose not only jobs, certifications, because it's not canceled. They don't belong in a position of influence. They're anti-civilization. I've said this many times. Evil, celebrating the death of a human being is evil. That person lacks any humanity. And I would say that no matter who was affected, that person doesn't belong in polite society, doesn't belong in any kind of position of influence or impact, whether it be on kids or anything else. And there's a weeding out happening, which this is where I'm some of the most exciting stuff and why this is such a big deal. Some people ask me, not understanding why this is such a big deal. It's called fruits of the Spirit. What are the results of what's going on as a result of Charlie Kirk's death? There's a lot of really evil and inhumane people who are losing their positions of influence, like being teachers or in the military or police or healthcare or whatever. That's a good thing. They should be regulated to the sidelines. I said it last week that they should be ostracized. Maybe some of them will actually learn their lesson eventually. Who knows? That will be a good thing for society because, you see, evil has no self-control and it continues to build and it destroys eventually itself, but everything around it, including our civilization. What kind of world do you want to live in? So removing, I'm not saying it needs to be done legally. In fact, I would be against that because we have other freedoms, constitutional freedoms that are important and we should abide by, but it doesn't mean there are not consequences, and it doesn't mean we should listen to you or that you should have any decision or influence. You see, what a lot of people that are on that side of the situation are missing is they're talking about, unity and turning down the temperature. It's not the responsibility of the side getting shot to turn down the temperature. It's the side of the ones doing the shooting. And what brings me hope and excitement for the future is the world is now seeing firsthand how truly evil the radical left is. And unfortunately, the radical left has taken over much of the Democratic Party because few of them are doing anything to really stop them. Yes, they're saying the perfunctory statements that political violence is not, shouldn't be tolerated, but they're not doing anything to discourage or take down those structures that encouraged it. They've created an atmosphere of encouragement, and the studies have shown too many Democrats, something like half or more, depending on the study you read, say that political violence is acceptable under some circumstances. Well, that number should be zero. To be fair, on the Republican side, it's a low single digits, and that's too high. Political violence should not be acceptable in any circumstance. Proof is in the pudding. Charlie Kirk, who impacted millions of people across this country and this world, many of them prayed. Many of them went to church. Many of them for the first time. Millions of people went to church and started embracing their faith. Which kind of society do you want to have? Millions are going to church, embracing their faith and trying to become better people and more involved in the society and their civic duty? Or do you want them to riot and burn down cities? There's no middle ground anymore. You're on one side of this or the other. And the beauty is millions have come to realize that. And we've come to a turning point in our country's history. And I am really encouraged by the response that I've seen from millions of people. It gives me reason for hope. There's still a lot of good folks out there. And we're going to have a renaissance in this country of decency, traditional family values, boldness in faith, love of country. That'll create a great economy too, won't it? Stay tuned next week for more great information on the Your Personal Bank Show. As long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.